The basement was dark. The beam from David's flashlight barely reached the back wall. Rex, the department's oldest canine, had stopped moving. Collapsed, really. Wounded. Still breathing. But fading. And then, a sound. Soft steps. Not a rescuer. Not backup. A child. Thin. Pale. Silent. She knelt beside the dog. Didn't cry. Didn't speak. Just pulled something from her sleeve. A red ribbon. She tied it gently around the dog's paw. And whispered, so soft David almost missed it. "You came back." The call came at 4:13 a.m. Unidentified disturbance. Possibly abandoned child. Possible intruder. Proceed with caution. David was halfway through his second coffee when dispatch buzzed him. "Lane, you're closest." He sighed. "Of course I am." He looked down at Rex, already alert in the rear compartment of the cruiser. "Let's go, partner." The location didn't make sense. That house had been abandoned for over a year. Neighbors said it was condemned after the fire. No one was supposed to be living there. Certainly not a child. But when David pulled up, he could feel it, something wasn't right. Rex growled softly as soon as the cruiser stopped. The front door was cracked open. Burn marks laced the side paneling like black veins. David signaled Rex to stay. Took the first few steps alone. His boots crunched glass on the porch. Inside, the floorboards moaned. He drew his weapon, flashlight cutting through the dark. The first floor was empty. Furniture overturned. Windows broken. Signs of old damage, but no new intrusions. Then he heard it. A faint scratching. From below. The basement. He clicked his radio. "Officer Lane. I'm going down. Advise backup ETA." 10 minutes out, dispatch replied. He nodded to himself. "Copy." Then turned to Rex. The dog was already at the stairs. Waiting. The basement was worse. Blackened by soot. Walls cracked. It didn't look livable. And yet, on the far side, behind a half-collapsed shelf, Rex stopped. Whined. Then growled. David moved faster. "Rex? What is it?" He came around the corner and froze. Rex was down. Collapsed. His sides scraped and bleeding, as if he'd shielded something with his body. And under his paw. A girl. No older than 9. Dirt-smudged face. Hollow eyes. But calm. She wasn't hiding. She was just there. Kneeling beside the dog. David dropped beside them, pulse surging. The girl didn't move. Didn't cry. She just looked at him, then back to Rex. She pulled something from her oversized hoodie sleeve. A piece of red ribbon. Frayed. Soft. She tied it carefully around Rex's paw. Then leaned forward, placed her forehead against his, and whispered. "You came back." David didn't speak. Didn't know how. The room was silent except for Rex's shallow breaths. Then the girl turned to David and asked, "Do I have to go back?" He blinked. "Back where?" She didn't answer. Just stood slowly. And walked toward the stairs. Paramedics arrived minutes later. They took Rex gently, oxygen, gauze, fluid drip. David rode with him. The girl sat beside him in silence. No name. No questions. Just that ribbon. Still tied to Rex's paw. And something in her posture that said, "You won't believe me anyway." David believed her. He just didn't know why yet. David watched the paramedics work on Rex with a surgeon's intensity. The dog had taken something sharp, maybe glass, maybe metal, to the side. The bleeding was under control, but Rex was drifting. Breaths shallow. Eyes half-lidded. The vet tech said he needed rest. David stayed beside him until the sedative kicked in. Only then did he glance toward the girl, sitting cross-legged near the corner of the emergency intake. Still no name. Still no tears. Still, watching. They brought them both to the hospital, one to the ER, one to the animal trauma unit next door. The girl hadn't moved from her seat since they arrived. Didn't flinch when the social worker came in. Didn't blink when David tried to offer her a juice box. She just held her arms around her knees and kept her eyes on Rex's collar, which David now held gently in his lap. The red ribbon still fluttered from its clasp. "Do we have a name yet?" the social worker asked. David shook his head. "Nothing. She hasn't said a word since the house." "Was she injured?" "No visible wounds." "But trauma?" David sighed. "You tell me." The woman crouched beside the girl. Introduced herself. Offered soft words. Nothing registered. Then, as she reached for the girl's arm, slow and careful, the girl finally spoke. 4 words. Clear. Soft. Unshakable. "He found me first." The room fell quiet. The social worker looked up at David. He gave a small nod. "She said that before." "To who?" "To me. In the ambulance." The girl didn't elaborate. Didn't repeat. But she reached across the seat. Picked up Rex's collar from David's lap. Held it gently, not possessively. Like it was sacred. Like it belonged. They got her a room. A temporary observation unit while social services sorted placement. David stood in the hallway as the nurse helped her inside. The girl didn't fight. Didn't panic. But she kept looking behind her, not for David. For Rex. Back at the K9 Trauma Center, Rex was stable. The vet said he'd taken the blow protecting something, or someone. The angle of the wound wasn't defensive. It was sheltering. David already knew the answer. She hadn't just found Rex. He'd found her. The question was how. At his desk that night, David pulled up archived dispatch records. 2 months back. 6. A year. There were no missing persons reports matching the girl's description. No outstanding Amber Alerts in the region. No record of children reported in the area, not in the past 2 years. It didn't make sense. He went back to the house the next morning. The fire damage was old, consistent with reports from over a year ago. But the basement? That was new. Too clean. As if someone had been keeping that space habitable. Rex had clearly recognized it. Why? He scanned the area behind the collapsed shelf. Found something half buried in the ash. A button. Bright red. Plastic. Too small for adult clothes. He drove straight to the hospital. The girl was still in the same observation room. This time, she looked up when he entered. He held out the button. Her eyes flickered. Recognition. But she didn't take it. Just whispered. It came off the day they left. David crouched beside her. Who left? She didn't answer. Instead, she looked toward the window. Then back at him. I stayed because he stayed. David asked, Rex? She nodded once. I knew he was looking. I heard him scratching. David felt something twist in his chest. She hadn't been trapped. She'd been waiting. Do you know what happened that day? She shook her head. They made noise. Then everything got quiet. I went to the basement. She paused. Then the door stayed closed. David sat beside her. They didn't come back? She didn't answer directly. Just pointed to the ribbon tied around Rex's collar. He always came back. David whispered, "Do you remember your name?" She hesitated. Then softly, "Ellie." He smiled gently. "Hi, Ellie." She finally looked at him fully. And for the first time, smiled back. David leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. 3 hours of searching. No records. No hits. No Ellie under missing persons. No Ellie in the school system. No Ellie in the foster registry. Not in the county. Not in the state. He tried phonetic spellings, partial matches, nicknames. Nothing. It was like she'd never existed. Or like someone had erased her. The hospital staff had started asking questions. Should we involve media? Does she have family? Was she in that house alone? David had no answers. Only instincts. And instincts told him Ellie wasn't lying. She'd been there for a long time. Maybe longer than anyone wanted to believe. He returned to her room with a small box. Inside, a sandwich, a juice box, and a packet of crayons. "Got you something," he said, setting the box down. Ellie glanced at the crayons. Not greedy. Not excited. Just curious. "Why?" she asked. David smiled gently. "Because it's quiet in here. And sometimes, drawing helps." She looked away. But when David left 20 minutes later, she was coloring quietly, not on the paper, but along the ribbon. Turning it into something soft and personal. Down the hall, Rex was improving. The vet techs were surprised. "He's healing fast. Dogs his age usually need more recovery time." David watched from the window. Rex was lying down, tail thumping lightly against the blanket. Still weak. But alert. Waiting. David had a thought. He returned to Ellie's room later that afternoon. "Want to see him?" She didn't smile. But her eyes changed, like the question filled something inside her. "Yes." The hospital staff hesitated, but David signed the release himself. "This is helping the investigation," he said firmly. It wasn't a lie. It was the truth. They walked slowly. Ellie's feet padded softly on the linoleum. As they neared Rex's recovery suite, she stopped, 10 feet from the door. David looked back. "You okay?" She nodded. But didn't move. Instead, she raised her hand. Touched the ribbon in her pocket. Then whispered, "Rex." Inside the room, the dog lifted his head. Eyes wide. Ears alert. Tail flicked once, then twice. He gave a single, soft bark. His first since the basement. David opened the door. Ellie entered slowly. No rush. No drama. She just walked to his side. Sat cross-legged beside the bed. And whispered something too soft to hear. Rex nudged his nose under her palm. They sat like that for a long time. No words needed. No explanations. Just knowing. The vet said he hadn't seen Rex respond to anyone like that, not even David. He recognized her, David said. The vet nodded. That much is clear. But how? The vet didn't answer. Because there wasn't one. That night, David dug deeper. He pulled Rex's records from his first year in service. Scanned through training logs, photos, case reports. One photo stopped him cold. A grainy image from 7 years ago. Rex as a young pup, being introduced to the community during an outreach program. Behind him, kneeling in the crowd? A girl. hair longer, smile wider. But the eyes were unmistakable. It was Ellie. David flipped the photo over. The date, April 14th, 7 years ago. The location, Brookside Elementary School. He cross-referenced the school. Burned down in a fire 6 years ago. No surviving student records. David whispered, "That's why she's not in the system." She'd vanished before the system knew her name. He printed the photo and brought it to the hospital the next morning. Ellie was awake, braiding the ribbon into a loop. David handed her the photo. She looked at it. Didn't speak. But her hands tightened around the edges. "You remember this?" he asked softly. She nodded. "That's the day I picked him." David blinked. "You what?" "I picked him," she repeated. "They brought all the puppies to the school. Said we could meet them. I liked him the most." He was quiet. David sat slowly. "You knew him before he was trained?" She nodded again. "I thought he forgot." David smiled. He didn't. Ellie didn't speak much. Not to adults, anyway. But with Rex in the room, she opened. Not wide. But enough. David didn't ask questions right away. He just listened. She colored with slow strokes, sitting beside Rex, whispering things like, "You weren't as big back then. And they said you were too gentle." David took mental notes. They weren't interviews. They were memories being shared, carefully, like fragile things pulled from a deep drawer. After the fourth visit, she handed David a drawing. A schoolyard. Kids. A playground. And a brown and black dog sitting beside a girl in a red shirt. Ellie looked at it and said, "That's the day before the fire." David blinked. "What fire?" She didn't look up. Brookside. David's chest tightened. Brookside Elementary had burned down 6 years ago. It had been labeled electrical. No fatalities. But no full student registry survived. Ellie had fallen through the cracks. Later that day, he pulled the archived incident report. No names. No parent records. But tucked in the narrative, one brief note. Student volunteer, Kala J., assigned to aftercare program. Assisted with animal therapy event. David froze. Kala J. He pulled Ellie aside during Rex's rest hour. "Do you remember Miss Kala?" Ellie's expression shifted. She looked sad. "She told me something before she left." "What?" Ellie repeated it carefully. "If you're ever alone, find Rex. He remembers better than people do." The phrase haunted David. It wasn't just comforting. It was instructional. Like someone had prepared her for being lost. David dug deeper. No one named Kala J. was listed as faculty. But in a small sidebar of the school's archived newsletter, he found her. Kala Jennings. Volunteer coordinator. Ran animal bonding sessions at underfunded schools. Worked part-time with the county K-9 unit. And was the one who brought Rex to Brookside that day. David pulled up her personnel file. She died in a car accident 5 years ago. But her notes were preserved. Among them, a handwritten field report dated the week before the fire. Rex continues to bond better with quiet children. Particularly LES. Seems to respond more to unspoken commands than verbal cues. Instinct-driven. Memory-linked? The last line was circled in red ink. Monitor long-term behavior. Possible case study. David leaned back in his chair. Someone knew Rex had potential. And Ellie hadn't just been a student. She'd been the match. Back at the hospital, Ellie and Rex were curled together during a therapy visit. David approached gently. "Ellie." Miss Calla. Was she your teacher? Ellie nodded slowly. Sort of. She took care of the ones who didn't fit in. David knelt. She picked you? Ellie whispered, No. She picked Rex. He picked me. David exhaled slowly. Did she say why? Ellie touched the red ribbon, now tied around her own wrist. She said I listened like he did. Without words. David felt something click. The reason Rex had gone straight to that house. Why he hadn't barked, hadn't waited. Why he knew someone was there. It wasn't training. It was memory. A memory that had lasted nearly 7 years. Across trauma. Separation. Silence. And now it had brought them back together. He filed a supplemental report. Didn't list Ellie as a victim. Or a runaway. He labeled her, recovered. Protected. Involved party, bonded K9 identifier. When asked for a definition, he wrote. Subject found due to unbroken K9 connection from prior bonding exposure. Tracking unassisted. Recovery not assigned, dog located her by instinct. Bellamy raised a brow when he read it. You're saying the dog remembered her? David nodded. No. I'm saying he never forgot. That night, David passed by Ellie's room. She was asleep beside Rex's bed. One hand on his back. The ribbon tied gently between them like a tether. David paused in the doorway. Then turned out the hall light so they could rest. Whatever came next, it had already started with a whisper. David stared at the file on his desk. It had been sent over from County Child Services without context, just a name and an attached custody petition. Margot Lee. No relation listed. No emergency contact flagged. Just a one-line reason. Guardian of interest, Brookside liaison. David typed the name into the database. No hits on parental records. No adoption claims. No flagged cases. He checked the volunteer list from Brookside. Still nothing. Whoever Margot Lee was, she didn't show up anywhere she should have. And that made David's stomach twist. He brought the paperwork to the hospital. Ellie was with Rex again, now strong enough to lift his head and wag when she entered. David waited until she was settled. Then sat beside her. Ellie, he said carefully. Do you know anyone named Margot Lee? Ellie's hands froze mid-stroke through Rex's fur. Then she pulled them back slowly. Eyes locked on David. She didn't answer. But her silence was the answer. David pressed gently, Is she family? Ellie shook her head. Did she hurt you? Still no answer. Just a whisper. She took the keys. David didn't understand. What keys? Ellie touched the red ribbon on her wrist. Miss Calla had a green room. With a locked cabinet. She told me if something happened, to keep the ribbon safe. Margot wanted it. David leaned forward. What was in the cabinet? Ellie shrugged. Papers. Boxes. I only saw once. Did you tell anyone? I told Rex. She looked away. He listened. David didn't like any of it. He pulled the old floor plan of Brookside Elementary from county archives. The fire had destroyed the western wing. But the staff room listed in the report, room 108, was marked green office. It was the only one. He enlarged the blueprint. There, along the northern wall, a built-in cabinet unit. No ventilation. Double-locked. That was the cabinet Ellie remembered. He filed a motion to block the custody request. It was a long shot, but he attached everything he had. The school report. The bonding logs. The photo of Ellie and Rex. The quote from Miss Calla's field notes. Then, at the bottom, he added a personal comment. If you remove her from him, I believe you'll erase the only consistent witness we have to a buried incident. The next morning, David received a call. It wasn't from county. It was from a private number. He answered. Lane. A woman's voice answered. Measured. Cold. You're making this more difficult than it needs to be. David didn't speak. You've had your moment. The girl is unstable. The dog's connection to her is circumstantial. Do the right thing and release custody. Who is this? A pause. Then. You'll regret protecting something you don't understand. Click. He stood in the hallway for a long time. Didn't realize his fists were clenched until his nails dug into his palm. He turned and walked back toward Ellie's room. She looked up the moment he entered. I heard your phone. David crouched beside her. Was that her voice? Ellie nodded. She used to whisper behind Miss Calla's back. Said the ribbon made me dangerous. David sat back, stunned. She said that? Ellie nodded again. Miss Calla said the ribbon was just a thread. A way to find your way back. David whispered, that's what it did. That night, David pulled the incident report on the Brookside fire again. But this time, he requested the uncensored version. The internal version. Not for public release. It took a while. And when it finally loaded, most of it was blacked out. But one section, one line buried in the conflicts of interest section, stood out. School's independent bonding program discontinued due to misalignment with state-funded therapy standards. All collected data to be sealed. David stared at it. That wasn't a standard school program. It had been experimental. And they'd tried to bury it. He flipped through old local articles from that year. One line, in a school newsletter buried in the archives. LES won the Spring Behavior Ribbon for Calm Animal Response. Presented by Officer Lane and Miss Calla. David dropped the page. That was his name. But he hadn't remembered it. Rex must have been involved in early community demonstrations, ones David hadn't personally attended. But the award? The ribbon? It had been real. And that was why Rex never forgot. The next morning, David brought the newsletter and the sealed report to Bellamy. His captain read through them slowly. Then looked up. You want to reopen a closed investigation based on a ribbon, a memory, and a dog? David nodded. Yeah. I do. Bellamy didn't answer right away. Then finally muttered. Sometimes the quiet ones are the loudest. He handed the papers back. Proceed. Brookside was silent. No birdsong. No wind. Just the crunch of David's boots on broken tile. The chain-link gate gave with a groan. The campus had been declared structurally unsafe, but David pulled strings. Bellamy had signed off with 3 words. Don't fall in. David had promised nothing. He followed the floor plan on his phone. The green office, room 108, had been part of the admin wing. Collapsed during the second flare-up. He pushed through the entry, ducked beneath a sagging beam. The smell of scorched wood still clung to the air, even years later. Moss crept up the inside walls like nature reclaiming the lies. There it was. The green paint still visible beneath black scorch marks. The far wall sagged inward, and most of the cabinet doors were gone, warped, bent, or melted. David swept ash from the floor with his sleeve. And there, hidden under debris, a rectangular shape still intact. A metal box. Locked tight. And beneath it, initials scraped into the floor with a nail or pen. E+R. David stared. Ellie and Rex. He worked the cabinet open with a crowbar. Hinges squealed, metal peeled. Inside, ash, fragments of folders. And near the back, a thick binder, scorched but mostly intact. David pulled it out and opened the front flap. The first page read, Experimental Bonding Program, Rex Unit 7B. Lead, Calla Jennings. Subject match, Eleanor Les. Status, active. Duration, 9 months. Notes, memory-based imprint confirmed. Long-term behavioral effects pending. David sat back on the cold floor. Turn the page. Log entries. Daily notes. Observations. Progress reports. Calla's handwriting. Ellie responds best when Rex initiates contact. Emotional tethering stronger than verbal response. Rex identifies Ellie's scent over all others, tested with 10-person array. Ellie says she hears quiet better when Rex is close. Reports fewer episodes of disassociation. David felt his throat tighten. This wasn't a casual program. This was a lifeline. Then he found it, a sealed envelope tucked into a plastic sleeve at the back. Scorched edges. Unopened. On the front. To the one who remembers. CJ. He opened it. Inside, a letter. If you're reading this, it means you found the cabinet. I'm sorry it had to be this way. Ellie isn't like other children. She listens deeper. Feels more. She doesn't speak when it's safe, she speaks when it matters. I didn't choose Rex. Rex chose her. And I honored that. When the district told me to shut it down, I refused. They said bonding wasn't scientifically valid. That dogs like Rex were too valuable to risk emotional interference. But I watched them. I watched him guard her in storms. Follow her across rooms. Calm her when even I couldn't. He wasn't a tool. He was her mirror. If something's happened to me, protect her. She doesn't need fixing. She needs remembering. And if Rex is with you, tell him thank you. For waiting. David folded the letter slowly. The room around him felt heavier now, not from debris, but from memory. It wasn't just ash and ruin. It was evidence. Proof that someone had seen Ellie. Understood her. Built something to preserve her, not erase her. And someone else, likely Margot Lee, had tried to bury it. He snapped photos of the letter, the binder, the floor initials. Bagged what was salvageable. Then stepped out into the sunlight. Outside, the world moved on, cars, wind, time. Inside, a girl and a dog had held each other through silence. And now, someone remembered. Back at the hospital, Rex stood when David entered. Still limping, but upright. Ellie looked up from her drawing. David held out the letter. I found her, he said quietly. Miss Calla. Ellie's eyes widened. David knelt. She remembered you. Ellie took the letter. Didn't cry. Didn't speak. She just touched the corner of the envelope to the ribbon on her wrist, a kind of silent blessing. Then whispered. Now he'll rest. Rex lay beside her again. Tail slow wagging. The bond unbroken. The experiment never failed. It was simply misunderstood. David dropped the binder and the scorched envelope onto Bellamy's desk. The captain took one look and sat back in his chair. What am I looking at? Evidence, David said. Of a program that never made it into the record. Bellamy flipped through the pages. Burned corners. Faded ink. Redacted footnotes. But the core was clear. Calla Jennings hadn't run a school animal activity. She'd run something deeper. Something unapproved. And something that had worked. You want me to file this? Bellamy asked. I want you to protect it, David said. Keep it from being buried again. Bellamy rubbed his temples. This goes over my head, Lane. Then let it. David held up the photo of Ellie with Rex, circled with her name in faded ink. This isn't about red tape anymore. Someone tried to silence her before. They won't stop now. Bellamy didn't respond right away. Then finally muttered, "You always did back the underdogs." David managed a tired smile. This time, the underdogs got 4 legs and a red ribbon. By the time he returned to the hospital, the mood had shifted. A man in a gray suit stood outside Ellie's room. Not child services. Not local PD. State credentials clipped to his lapel. He introduced himself without shaking hands. Trevor Hall. Licensing and Welfare Review. David raised a brow. Review of what? Handling of the minor. Disposition of the canine. Your report raised some concerns. David crossed his arms. What concerns? Hall didn't blink. Unorthodox use of a non-certified canine in civilian retrieval. Improper sheltering of a minor in a secure facility. Alleged influence of deceased staff on long-term psychological development. David's jaw clenched. This isn't a checklist, Mr. Hall. This is a girl who was forgotten. And a dog who refused to let her stay that way. Then you'll have no objection to a formal debrief. David said nothing. Hall smiled thinly. We'll be in touch. That night, David stayed by the nurse's station longer than usual. He watched Rex sleep with Ellie's hand resting on his head. She seemed peaceful. Unaware. Until he passed by her room to head out. As he walked, she caught his hand without looking. Slipped something into his coat pocket. Then returned to tracing the window with her finger. Didn't say a word. Didn't have to. Outside, under the parking lot lights, David unfolded the paper. 4 words, written in pencil. She's still watching. And beneath it, in smaller print. But I don't care anymore. He folded the note slowly. Pressed it to his palm. She knew. Not just about Hall. But about Margot Lee. Whoever she really was. Ellie had felt her presence like static, just beyond the walls. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid. Not because the danger was gone. But because Rex was still here. David didn't sleep that night. He combed through what was left of Kala's online presence, old blog entries, archived interviews, photos tagged and forgotten. He found one article, an interview with a local paper the year before her death. The quote that stuck out. You can't measure a memory in data points. But you can follow it like a thread. And if you trust the thread, it'll take you where the truth hides. The next morning, Rex's vet cleared him for discharge. But not to field duty. He was still healing. Let him rest, they said. He has, David replied quietly. For 6 years. They brought him into Ellie's room on a soft leash. He walked in, head high, tail wagging once. Ellie lit up for the first time in days. She leaned down and whispered something into his ear. David didn't hear the words. But Rex leaned into her. And lit the ribbon on her wrist. David stepped outside, needing air. Bellamy called. I put the file in a sealed drawer. You get one chance. David nodded into the phone. One's enough. Bellamy hesitated. Hall's not acting alone. I figured. And Margot Lee, her credentials are clean. Too clean. Alias? Maybe. But she's circling something, Lane. And now you are too. David looked back through the hospital window. Ellie and Rex. Girl and dog. Silent. Unshaken. Then let her circle, he said. The center's already spoken. The drive was quiet. David had told no one where they were going, not even Bellamy. Ellie sat in the back beside Rex, her fingers lightly brushing his fur. She hadn't spoken in half an hour. Didn't need to. The GPS blinked red as they turned off the paved road. "No signal out here," David muttered. Ellie simply said, "That's how they liked it." The farmhouse looked dead. Boarded windows. Collapsed porch. Grass grown thick enough to swallow boots. But Ellie walked ahead without hesitation. Rex followed, his head low, ears alert. David let them lead. Inside, the air was stale. A musty layer of mold and dust coated every surface. Ellie didn't flinch. She walked down a narrow hall, past 3 doors, and stopped at the 4th. The handle was rusted. She pushed it anyway. The door opened with a long, reluctant creak. Inside, darkness, but a familiar kind. The room with no sky. David switched on his flashlight. The ceiling had been sealed with plywood. No windows. No vents. Just walls. And silence. Ellie moved to the far corner. Pulled aside a rotted blanket. Then knelt. Her fingers found a gap between floorboards. She looked at David. "They never checked under here. They just thought I stopped drawing." David helped her pry the plank up. Beneath, dirt, an old nail, and a tin box, hinges rusted, corners worn. David lifted it slowly. Set it between them. Ellie opened it. Inside, folded papers, water-stained but legible. And a drawing, crayon on lined paper. 3 figures. One was clearly Rex. One was Ellie. The third, a woman. Tall. Wearing a long coat. David blinked. "That's not Miss Calla." Ellie nodded. "That's her." David pulled out the top sheet. A list of names. 7, maybe 8. All written in Calla's neat handwriting. Next to each, a behavior trait, a therapy note, and a dog's name. One line read, Ellie S., tactile response, silent command recognition, Rex 7B. Another, Jeremy W., low verbal reactive, Coda 2D. And then the last. Observation note, subject E showed mirroring capability. ADV, bonding risk if isolation occurs. David froze. Advanced bonding risk? Ellie looked down. That's why they moved me. David shook his head slowly. They were afraid you'd remember too much. There were more pages. Photos of dogs. Medical logs. Snippets of children's drawings, each marked with a small star in the corner. And a form. Unofficial. Unsigned. But dated 1 month before the Brookside fire. It was a request for termination of the program. Signed, M. Lee. David stared. The name wasn't just a threat. It had been involved from the beginning. Ellie whispered. She came one day. Before the fire. Said I had to stop asking questions. David looked at the drawing again. The woman in the coat, no face drawn. Just a long shadow behind her. Why did she care so much? Ellie looked at Rex. Then back at David. Because Calla said remembering is dangerous when it threatens forgetting. They packed everything back into the tin. David photographed every page. They left the room quietly. At the doorway, Ellie hesitated. Tied the ribbon around the doorknob. A small red mark against rotted wood. David asked, why leave it? Ellie didn't look back. So it doesn't forget me. As they drove away, a car passed in the other direction. Black SUV. Tinted windows. No plates. David didn't stop. Didn't turn. But in the mirror, he watched it idle near the gate. He said nothing. But his grip on the wheel tightened. Later that night, back at the station, David uploaded the documents into a secure folder. He flagged them as Evidence Recovery, Priority Watch. Attached no names. Only a title. The Ribbon Case. Then he opened his notebook. At the top, he wrote. The program didn't fail. It was erased. Under it, he wrote 7 names, the children from the list. Then circled one in red. Les. The only one they hadn't erased. Because she'd tied a ribbon around a dog's paw. And he had remembered. The email came at 2:43 a.m. No subject. No sender address. No signature. Just the line. You've seen too much. Let the dog go. David stared at the words. Read them again. And again. It wasn't just a threat. It was an order. Someone wanted this closed. Permanently. He didn't reply. Didn't forward it. Instead, he encrypted it into a private folder, off the network. Printed one copy. Burned the rest. He wasn't going to let Ellie, or Rex, disappear again. But something had changed. Rex stopped sleeping through the night. He'd get up and pace. Ears high, breathing quiet but alert. He'd stare at the window. Sniff at the door. Nothing ever happened. No knocks. No cars. But Rex knew. David moved them out of the hospital and into his safe house rental. It had a fenced yard and security cameras. He gave Ellie the bedroom. He and Rex took the couch. It wasn't a long-term solution. But nothing about this was long-term anymore. That morning, Ellie stirred her cereal without eating. David sat across from her. Are you okay? She nodded, but her eyes were unfocused. Then she said quietly. He's remembering more than me now. David blinked. What do you mean? She looked up. When we sleep, I see what he sees. Dreams? Memories. She reached down and stroked Rex's paw. He's looking for someone. David made another call to Bellamy. I need the other names, he said. The other kids in the program. Bellamy hesitated. Lane. I know it's buried. I know it was sealed. But this isn't about science anymore. It's about cleanup. A long pause. Then Bellamy's voice, quiet. I'll get you the file. But don't open it here. Later that night, a motion alert pinged David's phone. He checked the footage. A man in a hood, blurry in the camera's night vision, walking past the fence. He didn't stop. Didn't look up. But Rex stood up and growled before the alert came. David watched the clip again and again. There was something familiar about the gait. The way the man held his shoulders. Not Margot. Someone else. That night, Ellie didn't speak. She simply got up and tied the ribbon to Rex's collar again. He let her. Didn't move. Didn't blink. David watched as she whispered something. Too soft to hear. Then she lay down beside him. Her hand rested on his fur. Only then did he stop pacing. The next morning, the file arrived in an envelope taped to David's windshield. 7 names. 5 marked with red stamps, relocated. 1 marked deceased. Only Ellie's remained unmarked. He opened each folder carefully. Children with similar traits. Quiet. Overly observant. Some labeled responsive to nonverbal stimuli. All paired with dogs. All removed from public record after the program shut down. One had a note scrawled across the bottom. Subject dissociated after canine separation. Long-term instability. Transfer to state care. David closed the folder. His jaw clenched. They hadn't just ended the program. They'd buried its aftermath. Later, David found Ellie in the yard with Rex. She was drawing again. Circles and lines. She handed it to him. "It's a maze," she said. "But only one of us gets out." David stared at the lines. At the small figure in the middle holding a leash. Then he realized. She didn't expect both of them to survive this. He knelt beside her. "You both get out," he said. She didn't smile. Just whispered. "Then someone has to open the door." That night, a second email arrived. No text. Just an image. A photo of Rex, years ago. With a stamp at the bottom. "Confidential, do not redeploy." And a code he'd seen before. X77B. David knew what it meant. They'd classified Rex as unstable after the fire. Deemed his memory too patterned. He wasn't an asset anymore. He was a liability. And now they wanted him silenced. David shut the laptop. Picked up his badge. And for the first time in weeks, he considered using it to go public. But this wasn't the kind of truth you shouted. It was the kind you protected. Like a wounded animal. Or a ribbon around a paw. They left before sunrise. No GPS. No cameras. No calls. Just a handwritten map Kala had left in the back of the binder. A place she'd written about once. Where the ground remembers, even if the world forgets. Ellie rode in the back with Rex's head in her lap. The binder sat beside David. He had reread the final page 3 times that night. If someone finds this, and it still matters, then maybe memory won. But don't fight the forgetting. Just leave something behind that whispers. Even if no one hears it but a dog. The hill was real. An old oak with roots twisted like fingers. The air smelled of wet grass and unspoken things. They walked to the top in silence. Ellie knelt by the roots. Opened the tin. Placed the papers inside, every note, every name, the photo, even the crayon drawing. Then she pulled the ribbon from her wrist. And tied it gently to the tree's lowest branch. Not tight. Just enough that the wind could carry it. David crouched beside her. "You okay?" She nodded. Then whispered. "If anyone ever comes here, they'll know we remembered." Rex pressed his head to her side. Still. Silent. Unshaken. Back at the car, David checked his phone. No signal. No messages. Just one photo he had taken on impulse, Ellie standing with Rex under the tree. He thought about uploading it. But didn't. Instead, he saved it to a drive and locked it in his glove compartment. Some truths didn't need to be posted. They needed to be kept. A week passed. Then 2. Margot Lee never resurfaced. Trevor Hall's investigation was closed due to lack of jurisdiction. Ellie was placed into David's provisional custody under special circumstances. And Rex? Rex was reclassified. No longer inactive. Just, retired, reunified, recognized. At night, Ellie sometimes still stood by the window, tracing imaginary mazes with her fingers on the glass. But the lines had changed. Not closed circles anymore. Now they had exits. She said one night, "He dreams better now." David asked, "How do you know?" She smiled. "Because I do too." The ribbon stayed on the tree. Birds nested nearby. Rain came and left. But it never blew away. Sometimes, hikers passed and saw it flutter. None knew why it was there. But they felt something. Something that stayed with them longer than they expected. Like a whisper. Or a dog's gaze. Or a girl who never cried. In a box on David's shelf, sealed and unmarked, the original binder remained. Beside it, a collar, A name tag that read Rex 7B, and a single line handwritten on a folded page. It was the last thing Kala ever wrote. Memory is the only command that never fades.